And use all of us for your intentions and be all that we can be for the kingdom of God. Be with us this afternoon as we grow and learn together. In Jesus' name, amen. So, what are you going to remember from this week? Give me one. You're going to remember Elizabeth? I am too. And I, what's that? You're going to remember waking up at 2 a.m.? Oh, okay. Not because of a foghorn going off. Okay. Okay, that's different. But that's okay. Yeah, Elizabeth, that's kind of a high point of my week in that reconnection. That's pretty cool. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. That seemed like that worked pretty well. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. What was it? Yeah. So here's what it is. She's talking about the cowbell thing. So I help out in the primary building. Used to say the primary tent. Now we have to say the primary building at camp meeting. And some of you remember the corn song. How many know the corn song? A few. They don't really want to admit. They're just like raising their hand only a tiny little ways. So, I mean, it's a song for primaries. You know how primaries are. They love to sing. I mean, they're just. So the words of the song are, the first verse is, I'm not corn on the cob. I'm a precious child of God. And I'm glad I was born, not corn. So it's a very simple song like that, right? The kids love it. They just love it. And there's a couple of other songs that I've shared there we were able to do. And so this year, Mrs. Carol Wheeler, who leads out there in that building, said, I've never been able to find a good Ten Commandments song for the young people to sing. Could you write a Ten Commandments song? And I said, yeah, that sounds like a good challenge. So the song is done. I need to record it for her, but it's fun. It's very Adventist. The chorus is the fourth commandment. First verse is verse 3, and the second verse is the next is 6 through 10, or 5 through 10. But then the chorus always goes back to the Sabbath. And then on the bridge of the song, we stop singing and we do exactly what you did. We chant, love the Lord. And then after that, we go back to the chorus again. So you're actually practicing a primary song. Congratulations. All right, anything else that's sticking with you this week? What? Some of the stories? Okay. Is there anything you wish I would have talked about that I didn't? What is it, Antoine? You were nodding your head. You were going like this. You were agreeing with me when I said, is there anything else you wish I would have talked about? Antoine, is there anything else you wish I would have talked about? Would you share it with me, please? Anything? Is there anything you wish I would have talked about this week that I didn't talk about? Yeah, but I'm asking if there's something you wanted me to talk about. No? Yeah, well, maybe something will stress. What in relation to what? It's Elijah. Here's what usually happens when the Sabbath comes up when I talk about being a police officer, right? What about, don't you have Sabbath issues on working as a police officer, right? Wouldn't that be a consideration? Mm-hmm, yeah. So here's my answer to people. You have to work that out and be comfortable with God on that. There are professions that we readily recognize as being necessary to work on Sabbath. Name one. Name another one. What was that? Healthcare, yeah. Doctors and nurses, we say that all the time. The Adventists are very big in those fields. And no Adventist would really, give a second thought about the idea of having to work on Sabbath because you're in healthcare and it's certainly very necessary. And there are some that are clearly not necessary. right? Like maybe doing production in a factory or something like that. You know what, that probably doesn't have to be done on Sabbath. And then there's some that are gray. How about a farmer? Farmer work on Sabbath? You comfortable with that? I mean, they clearly have to do something. If they don't milk their cows will burst. So they probably can manage their schedule to change their Sabbaths, but there are some things that they're going to have to do. And law enforcement is one of those things where some of the law enforcement jobs need to be done on Sabbath. Being available to respond to emergencies, being available to respond to accidents and things like that. I mean, if you were on the way to church and you got in a bad car accident and you called 911, you would not want to hear, sorry, we don't have any police working today because it's Sabbath. You would want someone to respond. So, but that doesn't mean you would be comfortable with it. That doesn't mean that you would feel good in that role. I knew a gal who was a nurse in Loma Linda, and she had specifically gotten into nursing. She was interested in the medical field, but then she wouldn't have to worry about Sabbath conflicts and all of those kinds of things. And she ended up being scheduled to work on Sabbath, as nurses generally are. And she couldn't stand it. It bothered her too much personally to work on the Sabbath, even though she was working as a nurse. And she gave up her career and went into something else because she just couldn't. For her, it didn't work. Okay? So I always tell people that's something that you have to work out between you and God with a lot of prayer. First of all, if you're thinking at all about a law enforcement career or something similar to that, think about your motivation on why you're doing that, why you're leaning into that profession. I always felt like God called me into that profession. But if you don't feel that God is calling you into that profession, then don't go there. Because you see people at their worst and it's kind of ugly. But if God calls you to be there, you can be a great minister of the gospel and a great witness to people in their time of need. You really can. So it's a great mission opportunity, but not for everybody. Okay? So when I worked Sabbath, and I did, on patrol, I would change my day. It was Christian radio on the radio all the time, and I didn't do things like run radar. I would just look for opportunities to serve and to help people. That was how I did my Sabbath. Of course, I was responding to calls for service. All right, excellent question, Damien, Antoine. That was an outstanding question. Sorry, I got you mixed up with Elijah. Whatever. I got mixed up because I knew a Damien who, when he was 5 years old, jumped off a 3-story building, okay? Yeah. All right, any other questions yet? Nothing. Anything else you wish I would have talked about that I didn't talk about? Yeah, as soon as I leave, then you can. I wonder if Mr. Wilkinson. Who can tell me what the third commandment says? No, give me the second commandment. Yeah, give me the second commandment. There's disagreement in the masses. First one is have no other gods before me. And then thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven or earth. Or don't bow down themselves to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. Do you ever think about what that means? Or what it might mean? Visiting the iniquity, the sin, of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation. I will tell you, sin and propensity for sin gets handed down generationally. Okay? There was a family in New London. Well, they're still there. Their last name is Christian. Every cop knows them for generations because whoever it was back in the day was a troublemaker, and then their kids became troublemakers, and their grandkids became troublemakers, and it's hard to break free from that cycle. Now, I worked with a couple of the people in that family, and they were making some good changes. And, they weren't all criminals or anything like that. But there were quite a few of them that stayed in that family pattern. It's hard to break that pattern. I went on a domestic dispute call when I was working in Appleton, and it was a mother-daughter domestic dispute. Okay, so mom and daughter are fighting with each other, and daughter's like 11, I think, 11, 12, somewhere right in there. And so we went there. No crime had been committed, but I mean, they're at each other, and they're screaming at each other. We can't let that continue. So we're trying to find some peaceful resolution. And so the girl says, well, let me call grandma. So she calls grandma. So we got 3 generations of the same women, right? We got grandma, we got mom, we got daughter, all here on this problem together. Grandma is going to take daughter, and mom's going to stay at home. That'll help keep the peace till everybody gets calmed down. But before grandma got there, we're just kind of keeping the peace, and we're waiting for grandma to get there. Mom, the middle one, goes up to the daughter, gets right up to her face. She's really mad at her, and she says, "You're not my daughter." Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought when I heard it. It's like, what a creepy, awful thing to say, right? I mean, that's just nasty. Grandma gets there, and so we're going to transfer the daughter to go with grandma, and now mom will be left there in peace. And now grandma and mom get into it. And you'll think I'm making this up. I am not. Grandma went up to her daughter, mom, and said, "You're not my daughter." Word for word, exact same thing. Well, now you know where mom learned it, right? And a lot of that stuff gets handed down generationally. And you know whether or not you have any of those. Almost everybody probably has some kind of propensities that are handed down generationally. I told you I never heard my dad say "I love you," at least not that I can ever remember it. And that makes it really, really hard for me to tell my children I love them. It's very awkward. It's easy when they're little kids, but when they're grown-up, big people, to say "I love you" to them, for me, is I have to break a barrier to do that, because I've just never been given that pattern. I've never been given that model. You can break it. You can break those patterns, but they're hard, and you need to recognize them. You need to recognize that's something that I have a weakness, I have a propensity, I have a liability because of the family history or whatever, and face it and pray about it, and with God's grace, you'll break through it. Next question. I was too late, wasn't I? Yes, sir? There was lots of funny stuff that happened. One time I locked my keys in my car and I waited in the rain for like 20 minutes. And my window was rolled down the whole time. This is not a police story, sort of. It's tangentially a police story, okay? So one of the things that I did, besides being a police officer, I ran security at camp meeting. How many of you have been to Wisconsin camp meeting? I was the chief veggie cop. And I never did it. I wanted to get shirts made. I loved the term. I thought it was so cool. I wanted to get shirts that said, "Veggie cop, better for you than the real thing." I thought that would have been cool. We never did it. So I don't know. I did that about 10 years. Anyway, Rob Allen. Anybody know Rob Allen? Rob Allen? A couple people know Rob Allen. So Rob Allen was one of the guys, one of the younger guys. He started with us when he was like 18 years old, working on the security team. And he got interested in that kind of work. And so he ended up going to the police academy. I don't remember what year this was, but he went to the police academy at Fox Valley Technical College in Appleton. And so he wasn't able to help us. He was in the academy during camp meeting. He wasn't able to help us. But he was going to come around on the weekend. I knew he was coming Friday afternoon, so I was looking for him. I'm watching for Rob. I want to learn. What are you learning in the police academy? I instructed in that police academy for 23 years. For 28 years. And so I was anxious to have a chat with him. And so finally in the afternoon, I spot him. He's way far away. He's way down by the main pavilion building. And he's talking to John Campbell. John Campbell? Anyone? A couple guys. So John Campbell was another security guy. And they're talking to each other. Rob has apparently just gotten onto campus. So I see him, and in such a position that John is facing towards me and Rob is facing away from me. And I was overcome with a cloud of mischievousness. And I thought, I'm going to go do something. I sneak up behind him, and I'm going to do something to Robbie. So I started working my way down there, staying behind so he couldn't see me. And then pretty soon John saw me coming. So I went, right? So he played along very nicely. And I came up behind him. I'm thinking, what am I going to do to him? You know, am I just going to say boo? That's kind of corny. I know. I'll put him in a headlock. What a great idea. This guy, who's in police academy, learning defensive tactics and how to defend yourself, I'll be a guy who comes up behind him and puts him in a headlock and see how he responds. Now, I realized he might respond in a way that I'm not real pleased with. You know, elbows, knees, flip me over his shoulder, whatever. But I thought, I'll take the chance. So it just worked out so perfect. This was so perfect. I got up right behind him. Just so great. He never knew I was there. Arm under his neck like this, got him back off balance so he couldn't flip me, you know, and just kind of pulled back on him like this. Like, oh, now what are you going to do? How are you going to do? You know what he did? He said, oh, you're hurting me. Are you serious? Is that what they teach you in the police academy? Ow, you're hurting me? Come on. And then he said it again. He said, ow, ow. Goodness. So I was really disappointed in his reaction, but I thought, it's good to see him anyway, give him a hug, you know. But he turns around. I had never seen the man before in my life. He was a complete stranger to me. It was not Rob Allen. So what is the proper response then? What do you say next? Right? What you want to do is disappear. To melt down into a little droplet and just go into the ground and disappear. And the guy's looking at me going, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I thought you were someone. I saw it, you know. John's watching all of this. He sees me put him in a headlock. He sees the guy say, ow. He sees him turn around. He sees the shock on my face when I look at it, and he hears me say, I thought you were someone else. And John's reaction is, he's laughing so hard, and this guy's still rubbing his neck looking at me like a crazy man, and I'm trying to apologize. That's the most embarrassing moment of my life. How many of you guys know Jared Fast? It was his dad. I told you that one of the things that I pray for pretty regularly is humility. And I would encourage you to pray for humility because we're not good at it. We're not naturally good at it, okay? We tend to get full of ourselves. Humility is very beneficial. It kind of puts you back into your place and makes it real. So I pray for humility, and I encourage you to pray for humility. But careful, because God will give you that. He'll help you with that, and He helped me with that day. All right, so that was funny, but it wasn't a police story. What else you got? Kenny, you look like you're burning with a question. No. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry? Say again. Well, was there a time that I wanted to quit and not be a police officer? There was a time I was interested in going into the ministry. And I thought about leaving police work, not because I was dissatisfied with police work. I just thought maybe I was being called to something else. But that never went anywhere. It never panned out. I explored it a little bit, but never really went anywhere else. Probably the lowest point in my career was in 2016. it was a Sabbath morning. I don't know why, I've had several things happen on Sabbath mornings. I guess that statement worked. Sabbath morning, we're getting ready for church. And I get a call, SWAT team is being activated. We've got a hostage situation downtown. So I drove, this is at Neenah, and I drove to the station. And you ever hear of a swatting call? You know what a swatting is? Swatting is where somebody will make up something, and they'll call in and say, oh, I got this guy, he's got a gun to my head, or I'm holding a gun to someone's head, or I'm thinking about killing myself, whatever it is. They try to make it sound really, really, really bad, and they try to get a SWAT team to respond, even though nothing's happening. Okay, that's a swatting call. And we had a couple of those. And that's what I thought this was. I thought it was a swatting call, because, you know, what, a hostage taker downtown Neenah, that just doesn't happen. And it was at a motorcycle shop, kind of a motorcycle clubhouse shop downtown, where we'd had some trouble before. Anyway, so I'm driving to the station, and then we start getting information on the radio. They're giving updates, and I realized then this is the real thing. And I'm praying. I pray through these things all the time. And what happens is a disgruntled customer who's been up all night, I think, doing alcohol and drugs and stuff, he feels like this shop ripped him off, or at least one of the employees ripped him off and stole his motorcycle from him. So he's going to go get revenge. So he goes in with a MAC-10, and he fires off a couple of rounds, and he takes some hostages, and try to keep the story relatively short. So the SWAT team responds. He starts making demands. He says, I want this person to come to the shop. He's not talking to the police. He doesn't even know that the police know we're there. But he got one of the other employees to call this guy. And this guy is supposed to be there. And this guy, and he says, if that guy's not here in 10 minutes, I'm going to start shooting people. So we got the SWAT team. I mean, the SWAT team's already on the way by this time. We're assembling them. We can't get them there fast enough. They're trying to get ready to do an emergency entry. And then he puts out another ultimatum, and he says, if he's not here in a minute or so, I'm going to start shooting people. So the SWAT team made entry. And as they came in the back door, he saw them and opened up on them with the MAC-10. And the first officer in, of course, they were wearing helmets, they got shields and all kind of army, but the first guy gets hit right here. His helmet stops right here. So it caught just the corner of his helmet, just enough to protect it from being a deadly round. But it knocks him down. He yells, I'm hit. They go to protect him. Meanwhile, the bad guy keeps shooting at everybody, grazes one other officer, and they can't see him. They don't have any idea where the gunshots are coming from, because the guy is behind a metal desk, shooting through the desk. Bullets are going right through the metal desk. So we got one guy down. So the SWAT team leader says, everybody back out. So they back out of the building, they reassess. Most of the team goes this way. Two of the guys, the guy that got hit and the guy that's helping him, they ended up on the other side of the door. They don't want to cross that open door, so they go to the other end of this alley. 2 minutes pass. All of a sudden, more shots are fired inside. And now a guy comes out the door with doesn't have a gun in his hand. He comes out the door and then pulls a gun off of his waistband, handgun, and he jumps behind a pickup, and he's looking towards where the team went, and then he turns and starts going the other way, towards the other two officers. And they shot and killed him. And he was a hostage, not the bad guy. That's not good. They were justified in their action. Everybody, justified them because they legitimately thought that was the bad guy that was just trying to kill them. But that's a bad situation, right? Nobody wants the hostage to get killed. And there's more to the story, but I took a lot of heat. I mentioned the other day that when the little girl came up to me, that was in the aftermath of that incident. And it sort of split the community, because there were those who supported the police, and there were those who felt that they had done something wrong. And that was a really hard time. Lots of earnest prayer said during that time. But I got some good encouragement from people too. Yeah, I could probably talk about that incident for a week, but that's the gist of it. Until that point in my career, and that was 2.5 years before I retired. Until that point in my career, I never had anything quite like that. Our departments had been involved in shootings. I had been at one shooting but not involved in it, but never where it went bad like that. So that was a very hard time. And I told you that the press took me to task on that. They didn't like the way that I was handling it. What happened is there was a guy down in Racine who was killed by the police, and his dad, the Racine Police Department investigated the shooting. And his dad lobbied and rallied for a change in the law, and he successfully got it. It's known as, after his son, known as Michael's Law, that the police department cannot investigate their own officer-involved shooting. If the Neenah Police Department shoots somebody, somebody else has got to investigate that, not the Neenah Police Department. Before Michael's Law, it wasn't like that. You could investigate your own shooting. So that changed the law. And most departments have gone to the state agency, the Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation, to do those investigations. And that's who we called when we had the shooting. We called DCI to come and investigate the shooting, and they did. The problem with that is you can't talk to your officers. You can't talk to them and say what happened, because they're being interviewed by Division of Criminal Investigation, and they want sole ownership of the investigation. They don't want me having any involvement in that. There's some other issues that come up in that. So how do I know what happened then? I'm supposed to report to the press what happened, but I can't talk to my officers. So you talk to witnesses. So we talked to the lady that owned the barber shop on the corner where the shooting occurred. We talked to our mayor, who happened to be across the road because he owned a business downtown. We talked to the chief of police from the next town over because he had responded. Him and his assistant chief had responded. And those 4 people all said the same thing. And that was, they explained what happened, and they said the guy came out, and they heard the officers say, "Show me your hands," and he didn't, and they shot him. They all had it wrong. My press release was based on what they told me, but it was wrong. All 4 of those witnesses, we talked about how witnesses don't always get things right. There was never any warning. The guy turned, started running towards the police officer, and they shot him. And then they said, there's a process that you go through after you shoot someone, and they started giving those commands. And anyway, so when I did the press release, what happened, it was inaccurate. Because I said, they gave a warning. They did not give a warning. I thought they gave a warning because that's what the witnesses said. I couldn't talk to my officers who could have told me. So it's complicated. It's hard. But then, of course, I was accused of lying. I made that story up. So, boy. Now you're taking me back there, and I don't really want to go there. That was a dark time. As a matter of fact, it just, the last lawsuit was just finalized last week, I believe. And dismissed by the federal court judge up in Green Bay. So there's nothing else pending. There were several suits against the police department, but all of them, the police department prevailed, the city prevailed, all of that. All right. Take me somewhere else. You got another question? Domestic violence is, typically it's violence between spouses or partners, but it's, every state defines it a little bit different. In the state of Wisconsin, it's any adults who get into physical confrontation who either live together, are married, were married, or ever did live together. Ever. So when you're 30 years old, you got a brother? How old's your brother? 10, okay. So when you're 30 and he's 25 or whatever, if you two get in a fight, it's a domestic because you once lived together under Wisconsin law. That's a domestic dispute. What else you got? Chasing cars, yeah, I did it. Done a lot of those. Yep. I don't know that I really have any lessons to give you out of those, other than to tell you they are extremely dangerous. Man, I should have been killed in one of them. I wasn't, but one of them, I was driving over my head. I shouldn't have been going that fast. I'm going behind you to, I'm going all the way back to Alice. That's a great question. I said in the message this morning that I was always preaching to the officers, treat everybody with dignity and respect. Treat everybody with dignity and respect. Especially the ones that you're arresting. Especially the ones that are trying their best to get under your skin. That's where it's most important about all. I was working in Appleton, and there was an old drunk that we arrested frequently. His name was Henry Phillips. And I got a call one time, there's a guy passed out on the sidewalk. I go down there, it's Henry Phillips. He's passed out on the sidewalk down on the south side. And he's got warrants for his arrest. So I arrested him for the warrants, put him in the backseat of the squad, and he went into mean mode. I mean, just the most vile, awful things you can imagine him saying. I'm gonna kill you, and I'm gonna find your family, and I'm gonna kill them. And I mean, he just going on and on and on. I just ignored him. And we get to the jail. I transfer him to the jail. I was very happy to do that. I never said anything back to him or attacked him back or anything like that. And that's what I'm preaching. That's how you have to be. You have to be above their behavior. Treat them with dignity and respect, because they'll remember it later, maybe. So not too long after that, I got the chief's job up in New London. And I was happy to be away from Henry Phillips. And started in a smaller town, a little different pace and everything. And then one day, one of the officers comes to me and he says, guess what? 2 guys from Appleton just moved to town. Henry Phillips and Kenny Gluedemans, and they're stealing alcohol over at the Festival of Foods. Great. Henry Phillips lives in town. Great. Anyway, so they got arrested several times, just like they had in Appleton. Kenny had a different story. Kenny was also kind of an old drunk, but he was a big guy, and everybody, they knew about him is he'd gotten into a bar fight one time, and the guy he got into a bar fight with pulled a gun on him, and Kenny turned the gun and shot the man with his own gun and killed him. And so these two are hooked up together, and they end up in New London. And they're getting arrested, but I'm the chief, and I don't have to deal with that directly. But I do get invited to do other things, which was cool. One of the neat things as a police chief is you get invited to do presentations, to talk to this civic group or that, whatever. So I got invited to a church to talk to a youth group, nice, really healthy youth group, nice, large group. And they wanted me to come talk about alcohol and drugs. Just, yeah, cool, I can do that. So I'm getting ready to go. It's the day that I'm going to go talk to them. And I started getting this impression. I told my wife, I said, I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like God wants me to take Henry Phillips and Kenny Gluedemans to this presentation. To speak. Prayed about it. Still had the impression. I thought, well, they're probably not home anyway. I'll drive by the house. They're probably not home. If they're home, they're probably drunk, right? And anyway, so I drove to the house, knocked on the door. They're home. So I said, and I could smell a little alcohol in their breath, but they weren't intoxicated. I said, how'd you guys like to make 20 bucks? What do we got to do? I want you to go talk to some teenagers about the dangers of alcohol and drugs. Okay. Now I've got them in my squad car, my unmarked. We're driving to the church. And they're asking me questions about, what to expect. And I'm saying things to them, trying to make sure this doesn't get out of hand. I'm really paranoid. So we get to the church and we start the presentation. I start the presentation and I start talking, and I'm really afraid to let them talk. So I'm just monopolizing the microphone. I'm talking about them, and I mentioned this time that I arrested Henry when he was threatening me and everything. And I said, Henry, do you remember that? And he said, no. But anyway, I brought him there. I got to let him talk. So I finally said, guys, would you say that alcohol has had a negative impact on your lives? And Henry reached over, grabbed the microphone from me, pulled it to his chest, and went like this. And he said, I am a chronic alcoholic, and my doctor says if I don't stop drinking, I'll be dead within a year. And I can't stop. And the room went silent. And every ear was listening to Henry Phillips. And he told them about some of the stuff that had happened to him. Lost his girlfriend who died of an overdose. He described sleeping in parks because he was homeless most of the time. He described freezing to the ground from his own urine on cold nights. He described defecating himself. I mean, he did not pull back any punches. He was telling the whole story in all of its ugly truth. And then it was Kenny's turn. And Kenny took the microphone and told the story of when he killed that guy with his own gun. And here was the really brilliant part of his presentation. He said, looking back on that, I didn't go to prison or anything because they ruled it self-defense. But I know that night never would have happened if it wasn't for alcohol. What a great insight. And they won the day, these two drunks. It gave a presentation to these young people that I couldn't, right? It was just fabulous. And it wasn't my idea. That's just God at work, just cooperating when he prompts you. Same thing when he told me on Monday, he prompted me to call Elizabeth up in Appleton. It just cool stuff happens when you cooperate with God's will. Cool stuff happens. Yes, sir. He died. Not within that year, though. No, he didn't get better or anything else, but continued to live his life. He was really deeply entrenched. But for a moment, even he could be used by God to reach somebody else. Yes, ma'am. I think that it is beyond our capacity as humans. And so what we have to do is go into an interim, some sort of middle ground, where we admit to God, I'm very angry with this person because of whatever happened. I don't have the capacity to forgive them. I don't want to forgive them. I don't feel forgiveness in my heart. But God, I know it's the right thing to do. You told me it's the right thing to do. So you have to give me, God. Give me the capacity to forgive. I think that's what you have to do. And he will give you the capacity to forgive. And I've heard other people give testimony of having been through that exact same thing. There are some powerful stories out there about people who've been through just terrible things and forgave their captor, or forgave their attacker, or forgave their rapist, or whatever it was. A lot of people struggle with child abuse and holding a grudge against the parent that abused them. But I've heard some powerful testimonies from people who then finally were able to forgive their own parent for the abuse that came to them. And again, many times that is generational. The reason a parent abuses their child is because that parent also was abused when they were a child. Yes, ma'am. the first thing to do is to recognize it. How do you stop that generational cycle? And the first thing is to recognize it, to see it, right? I think that's very important. And once you can see it and identify it in your own life, you can talk about it, you can name it, you can pray about it, and that's what you have to do, is you have to give that to God and ask for help. Because on your own, you're probably not going to break it. We're pretty weak in those regards, in following, in the weaknesses of those who went before us. But God can give you the strength to break out of that, to overcome that. But recognize it, identify it, talk about it very candidly with God. God, I recognize I have this liability. I know where it comes from, I understand, but I definitely have that liability and I need your help to break the pattern. F. Well, that last part's a little bit complicated, I think. But forgiving and forgetting, is there a difference between forgiving and forgetting? Yeah, I think there's a difference in there. In many cases, if you truly forgive, it sort of disappears. But it depends what it is. I mean, if you think about Elizabeth's case up in Appleton, she's never going to forget that. You wouldn't expect her to forget that. There'd probably be something wrong if she could forget that. That's a part of who she is now. Unfortunately, she can come to the point of forgiving her attacker, but she will always remember that. That's okay. That's okay. As long as, she's not letting it churn and letting it create bitterness and resentment. Truly forgive and let it go. But you're always going to remember that. The other part of your question, does forgiveness always mean reconciling with that person? Do you always need to go to that person and say, hey, I just want you to know that I forgive you and we're cool, whatever, right? And I think it's good if you can do that. A lot of times that is very helpful because it helps that other person sometimes as well, and there can be some tremendous healing. But sometimes that can't happen. The person might not even be alive anymore that you need to forgive, right? You may be holding a grudge against somebody who's not even alive anymore, or they're not in your world anymore, and you don't really have the opportunity to go to them, but you still forgive. You got to get that out of your system. Let go. When you don't forgive someone, when you hold a grudge, you feel like you're hurting that other person. That's what it feels like. If I hold a grudge against you, man, it feels like I'm doing something to you. But in reality, I am hurting myself. All that does is eat at me. And the other person probably doesn't even know about it. I'm going to skip that story. Never mind. All right. What else you got? Other questions? Comments, concerns? Tell me something that, you got one? It's actually a cool question. He asked the cop donut question. This is honestly true. Someone did a survey one time, and they went to a bunch of, I think it was third graders. And they had a sentence that started, when I see a police officer, he is blank. And then the third graders got it. And the most common one answer was, at a donut shop. Where does that come from? No idea? It's actually very logical. It doesn't make as much sense in today's world, but if you would go back 30, 40 years, you would understand. Cops work what hours? All the time, okay? So if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're working somewhere, and you want to get a drink or a bite to eat or something, are the restaurants open? Nope. And the gas stations back then, most of them, they didn't have the convenience stores like they do now. They were just gas stations. So there weren't very many options. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, you could always find a donut shop open, because that's when they're making the donuts for the morning, for that morning. They were always open. And they loved having cops in, because it gave them a sense of security because they would get robbed you know, and that kind of thing. So there's logic behind it. Guess what my favorite kind of donut is? Why did you say caramel? You guys both say caramel at the same time. Where did that come from? I don't like donuts. I don't like donuts. I don't drink coffee. Coffee smells cool, but I can't stand the taste of it. So, don't like donut holes. No. Nope. Yes, ma'am.
Let's say you have a friend that you don't consider a friend, but they consider you a friend. How do you go and talk to them and be like, hey, respectfully, I don't like you. How do you do that?
I don't do that. The question is, if someone considers you a friend, but you don't consider them a friend, how do you confront them and say, I don't want to be your friend? I don't do it. I don't do it. If they want to count me as a friend, I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that. There are people that are hard to be friends with. Sometimes they're your relation, okay? And they'll wear you out. But, you know, if you can look at it, like I got a cousin. And when I call, or when she calls me, because I almost never call her, she calls me, but when she calls me, and I say, I'll look at the phone and say, oh, it's Patty. And my wife will roll her eyes, and it's like, here we go, because she's very needy, and when she talks, she needs affirmation, she needs someone to complain to, she needs to dump on somebody. You know what? You've been there, right? And it's kind of a burden. But you know what? When she was 3 years old, her mom died in childbirth. And she was the oldest, she was 4 years old. She was the oldest of 3 children and ended up becoming the mom in that house. She had a really lousy life. And I remind myself of that. And she just needs some affirmation now and then. If I can help her with a little bit of that, that's good. But then you probably have to have an honest conversation and say, look, you're wearing me out. I don't mind talking to you and supporting you and helping you, but you're going to wear me out. Let's agree that when we talk, it's going to be a maximum of X minutes, X number of days a week. I had a gal who used to call me over and over when I was a chief in New London, and she would write these like letters, and she'd write it, fill up the paper, and just start writing around the outside, and around and around and around and around, and through every little, and then flip it over and do the same thing, and it was like just crazy. And I talked to a professional counselor with her. I had a friend who was a professional counselor. I don't know what to do with her. She is wearing me out. He said, exactly what I just told you. He said, agree with her that when you talk to her, it's going to be for X minutes, and then you're going to discontinue the phone call or the conversation or whatever it is. Agree to what those limits are going to be, and then live within that. What else you got? Yes. You are. It's very dangerous. I got a story for everything. So it was very common, especially early in my career, when you're working night shift, working out in Southern California, and even when I was in Appleton, that these places that are open late at night, convenience store or whatever, they don't mind giving you free food because they want you there. You are security for that place, so they want you there. But when you take, it's called a gratuity, when you take that gratuity, it creates at least the illusion that there will be a payback at some point. They're giving you free food, what do you give them? Right? And that's very dangerous in law enforcement. So most departments have pretty strict policies against accepting those gratuities because you just don't want to get into either owing someone or making it look like you owe somebody, or maybe there will be an accusation that you only did that for that person because they gave you free X or whatever. When I was at Riverside, the Taco Bell was giving free meals to police officers. Free meals. And we didn't have a policy against it at that time at the Riverside Police Department. Taco Bell stopped doing that after one of our officers drove his family to Taco Bell. He was in uniform in his personal car, had his whole family in the car, and bought them supper. Didn't buy them supper, got them a free supper from Taco Bell. That's not what Taco Bell intended. And they stopped it. You hear stories about abuse. So that unfortunately happens. But most, all the progressive police departments that I know in the last 20 years now have policies forbidding that. So sometimes sometimes you're kind of forced into a situation. Like a waitress brings you a drink and says, yeah, no charge, and walks away. Then you just leave the money on the table. Even though they say it's free, pay for it anyway. I was at a restaurant with my cousin Patty, and we were there, and it wasn't my cousin Patty. I was there with another police officer. I had been to this restaurant with my cousin Patty, but I was there with another police officer. And the waitress came and didn't say that they were giving us a free meal. She said, those people who are just leaving paid for your meal. Because we were police officers. That's pretty cool, right? And they waved at us and off they went. So you know what we did? We paid it forward. And we said, see that older couple over there? We want to pay for their meal. There's more than yours, I don't care. I want to pay for their meal, but don't tell them until after we're gone. Just tell them somebody paid for their meal, doesn't matter who it was. So you find ways, to keep it honest. Yes, sir, you and Foggy, way in the back, hardly can see you. Yep.
What are officers allowed to do in those situations? Ask for I don't know if you've seen some of those videos circulating on YouTube or Facebook. It also feels some of those people want to have a confrontation, but anyway.
Well, that's certainly true, and there are certainly times where the police overstep their bounds as well. There's errors on both sides. I'm going to answer that in a real roundabout way. So when I was teaching at Fox Valley Technical College, I taught, one of the main things that I taught was vehicle contacts, at 3 levels. So there's approach contacts, non-approach contacts, and high-risk contacts. But when you contact someone in a traffic stop, essentially, and sometimes the question would come up, what if you stop another police officer? What's the right thing to do if you stop another police officer? What is professional courtesy? Do you let them go? Do you write them a ticket? What do you do? And I said, I flip it around. Here's my definition of professional courtesy. Professional courtesy is not how you behave as the officer who has stopped another officer. That's not what professional courtesy is about. Professional courtesy is about you, as an off-duty police officer, being stopped by an on-duty police officer. Professional courtesy is your obligation to make their job as easy as possible. No expectations, just be polite, just be cooperative, make their job easy. That's professional courtesy. And so, use that as a springboard. That's the advice that I give everybody if they're stopped in a traffic stop. It's not your job to be the attorney, to be the judge, to be the debater, or anything. They got a tough job. Make their job easy. If you dispute what they're charging you with or whatever, we have a forum for that. We have court for that. We have a way of doing that. But getting into an argument in the car is going to do nobody any good. There are times where you may not be sure that this is legitimately a police officer. Maybe it's an unmarked, maybe they're not even in uniform or something like that. And there have been times, it kind of comes in spurts, but every once in a while you'll hear about somebody pulling people over and they're not really a police officer. So if you have doubts about that, if you're concerned, then the recommendation is drive to a very public place, police department if you can, but go to a very, pull over, and if you have a phone with you and you can call and say, hey, look, there's a police officer trying to pull me over, I'm just not convinced it's a police officer, so I am going to drive to Festival Foods and park in the front of Festival Foods where there are cameras and there are lights and there are people around, and that's where I'm stopping. And cops are cool with that, okay? Was there another piece I didn't answer? It's pretty normal to ask. I wouldn't say it happens most of the time, but it's not unusual to ask that. But they can't demand it. You can demand it from the driver because that's the person, if you're going to issue a citation or warning, you've got to have their identification. You can ask the other people to identify themselves, but depending upon the level of suspicion, if you've got the reasonable suspicion on those people as well, then you can ask for the ID on those other people. If they're just riding along and it means nothing, you can ask, but you can't demand. Yeah, you can probably clarify, you can find a tactful way, to say, I'd rather not show you my identification. Are you demanding it or asking? Right? But from my perspective, I mean, if you're convinced it's police, I mean, it's another thing if you're not sure if they're really the cop. But if you're convinced it's the police, what harm is there in them knowing who you are? Maybe you can think of something, but it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where you wouldn't want them to know who you are. All they're going to do is run a warrants check on you, make sure you don't have any warrants. So, yes, ma'am. So I was working in Riverside. I was running traffic on the freeway, on the 91 freeway, and this little red pickup, four-wheel drive, jack way up, flies past me like 90 miles an hour, like I'm not even there. And so I go after it. I thought it was going to be a pursuit. And, but it wasn't a pursuit, but it went for a while before she finally pulled over. Blonde girl driving the car. And so I walked, this is a good story, isn't it? Yeah, I'm making it up. That's none of that. I probably stopped the red pickup at some point, but that's not it. That's not how I memorized. God has ways of finding you your life partner. And I encourage you to pray for that life partner, that God would show you. I used to do that all the time. God, please help me to find the woman, that you've chosen for me. And it took way longer than I wanted it to. I was very anxious to find this girl. When I went to California to get into law enforcement, because there weren't very many job openings in Wisconsin. So I went to California. I had an aunt who lived in Loma Linda. I stayed with her, and I started applying for the departments around there. I applied at the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. I failed their interview. I went to the Rialto Police Department. I failed their interview. I went to the San Bernardino City Police Department. I passed their interviews and everything, but I failed the background check. There were some other ones in there, I don't remember what other places. But this is like a year now. I'm just testing, and I'm not having success. Then I tested at Redlands PD and Riverside PD, and both of those were processing me at the same time. I could have gone to either department. Riverside made the first job offer. I went to Riverside, right? See, kind of follow the timing there. It's like, I went to California because I couldn't find work here. I wanted to work for San Bernardino County. Nope. I wanted to work for Rialto. Nope. I wanted to work for San Bernardino City. Nope. Getting turned down, getting kind of worn out on this, It's like, what's wrong with me? Nobody's hiring me. Then I got a choice between two, Redlands and Riverside. I go to Riverside. if I had worked at San Bernardino Sheriff, or San Bernardino PD, or Rialto PD, or Redlands, I'd have never met my wife. God had this all worked out, even though I was not happy with the results sometimes. One of the guys I worked with at Redlands, or at Riverside, who became a good friend of mine, his wife's best friend is the blonde girl back there. And he introduced me to her. And on our first date, I took her water skiing. At Paris Lake in Southern California, which is a busy place. So if you want good water skiing, you get there first thing in the morning when they open the gates. They open the gates at 6 a.m. I told her, I said, I'm picking you up at 5:30 in the morning, and we're going to go water skiing at 6. I had some friends who had a boat, and we were going to meet them there. So girls, tell the guys, if you want to go on a date that starts at 5:30 in the morning, what time do you have to get up? Yeah, guys. She got up at like 3 in the morning to start getting ready. That was not a consideration of mine. I figured she'd get up at 5:15, you're ready at 5:30, I'd pick her up. Picked her up at 5:30, dropped her off at about midnight. Whoa. And we did the same thing. We did the same thing the next week. Wait, what? Yeah, too many details. God has, I'm telling you, pray for your spouse. Pray for the one that God's going to bring into your life, and that you'll have, your eyes will be open, you'll know it's the right one, right? And that God will protect that person. That woman back there has been such a blessing to me. I cannot imagine, we've been married 36 years, and I cannot imagine life without her. We've got 5 children, wonderful kids, all grown up. We just have a great relationship. We've learned, and we went through some hard times and difficulties together. There have been tears, but you learn how to talk to each other. You learn how to share things. You learn how to share what's on your heart and be honest with each other without being hurtful towards each other. It's hard, and you work through some of that stuff, but oh, what a blessing to be married to your best friend. I mean, it's great. It is just great. Pray for your future spouse. Yes, sir? Am I good at soccer? See, good is one of those words. That's just one of those words. You know, to my grandson, who's 6 years old, I'm good at soccer. You know? To Nathan Bro, not so much. He's a good soccer player. I played in college, I told you that. But it sounds cool. So, oh, I played soccer in college. Right? Okay, it's a junior college. 2-year college. And it was like it was the only fall sport they had. So they had no football teams. It's the University of Wisconsin, Washington County in West Bend, right? There's no football team. So if you want to play fall sports, the only option is soccer. So the athlete guys, they go out for soccer, right? Having never played before. That was my role. I went out for the soccer team having never played before, and that's how most of the guys were. And our coach was a football player. He was the most valuable player for the Wisconsin Badgers football team in 1967, and he was our coach. He had a football head. He didn't have a soccer head, but he learned the fundamentals, right? And he taught us the fundamentals, and what I did well is I practiced. And a good friend of mine. We practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced, and that made a difference. So my freshman year, we won the conference championship, and the second year, we came to a 1-1 tie, had a shootout. It just ended in a 1-1 tie, and we were co-champions. So my name is on a soccer trophy in a trophy display case in West Bend, Wisconsin. It's old and it's dusty, and you probably hardly read it anymore, but it's there. So does that make me good? I once was competitive. I'll say that, okay? Yes? Hey. There are times in life where you have to choose between two good things. Both are good. It's not choosing between a good thing and a bad thing. Good thing and a good thing. You can't do them both, right? That's a good thing. So I won't be here. So I won't. She's really given up a lot of time with me this week, to be here, and I need to give her that time back. So we also have a house being built, which is a big deal. Yes, ma'am. Wow. The second one is broad and can probably go in a lot of different directions. But as far as, first of all, when you say the word speed trap, I hate that word speed. What is a speed trap? They're running radar. Is that a speed trap? When I get on Google Maps and it's telling me how to go somewhere, and then all of a sudden it goes, speed trap ahead. Because a police officer is helping someone with a flat tire. And it comes across Google as a speed trap. I hate that. But so radar is still very much in use, and radar, there are different types, different levels of radar. There's some that are very simple. There's moving radar, stationary radar, and there's different things. But it's basically radar like we've always known. And then there's LiDAR, which is laser. So instead of sending a wide radar beam out, it's sending a very focused. You aim it. You aim it at like the license plate of a car coming towards you, and it bounces that laser beam off of the license plate and comes back. So it's very accurate in a heavier traffic situation. But other than the fact that it is laser-based instead of radar-based, it's essentially the same thing. It's sending out a signal, measures the difference in the speed of those signals returning. Yes. It can track the speed in both directions, but not at the same time. At least all the ones that I'm familiar with. So if you're following along in traffic and the car ahead of you is going faster than you, radar isn't really set up to do that. That you have to pace with your own vehicle. You just have to follow them and see what their speed is. But I mean, if you're stationary, you can get them coming, going, whatever. If you're driving down the road, you have moving radar, you can get them coming at you. And then there's also, of course, aircraft enforcement. And so an officer on the side of the road may be relying upon aircraft timing speed from one intersection to the next intersection and determining speed off of that. And then they, radio to that squad and they make the traffic stop and do the enforcement. But that happens a lot, quite a bit in Wisconsin, only state patrol, but they use it quite a bit. All right, we probably should wrap this up. Test your memories here. This is going way back to Monday, very early. Some of the first words out of my mouth. What do I like? What? Excellent. Excellent. Natalie, right? Natalie says words. I do like words. I like writing stories. I like writing songs. I like writing poetry. Who said woo-hoo on poetry? Oh, yeah, of course. So, none of you probably read Adventist Review, but I have an article coming out in Adventist Review that I think is kind of a cool article, and it has something to do with Wisconsin Academy. So you can look for an opportunity. I don't even know when it's going to print. I sent it like in February. Never heard anything from them. No response, no response, no response, no response. Late August they say, you gotta send us stuff today. You have to tell us today because it's going to print. Well, where did that come from? So anyway, I'm not even sure when that's coming out, but I have self-published 2 books. They're basically poetry books and short story books. And I want Antoine to be able to read those. So what I would like to do is I'll give one to the girls' dorm and I'll give one to the guys' dorm. This one is gentler. I would like it to go to the girls' dorm. This one's a little meatier, so I'd like it to go to the guys' dorm. And you're all invited to come to the primary building at camp meeting next year. Exactly. And sing with us and learn some new songs. And learn how to sing like a primary. You know, there's a guy, Robert Fulgham wrote a book called Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. You heard that right. Everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten. Like, be nice, be fair, treat other people well, that kind of stuff. But he said, if you go to a group of kindergartners and you say, how many of you can dance? How many hands go up in the kindergarten class? Every single one of them. What if you say, how many of you can draw? How many hands go up? Every single one of them. What if you say, how many of you can sing? Every single hand goes up. Now, ask that same question to a group of high school sophomores. Right? Those same questions. How many hands go up? Couple here and there. How did we teach people not to sing, dance, and draw? How did that happen? What's going on there? It's all about your own perceptions, your self-perceptions. How did I get onto that? I don't know I don't know exactly where that came from. Hey, I got to tell you this. You guys are great. You guys have been a treat. I have really enjoyed being here this week. I know I get to come back and help out for Dean Serna when he's all bundled up in the hospital and recovering from that. He's donating a kidney, and that's something that I did. He's donating a kidney because he is a good-hearted man. I donated a kidney because mine had cancer on it. But I know a little bit about that recovery process and what he's got in front of him. But I'm sure everything will work out well, and I know that all of you will be praying for him. So thank you, young people, for allowing me to be here. Thank you for being so gracious to Carla and to me. And it has been just really cool. So how about like a virtual fist bump, yeah? Well, no, I meant a virtual one, not a real one. Come on, give me a fist. Give me a fist. There you go, there you go, there you go. You guys are cool, let's pray. God in heaven, thank you so much for these people. They're just such wonderful people. So different and yet so endearing, and so much talent, and so much potential, and so much future in front of them. I don't know what's going to happen with these people, but I know you're going to do wonderful things with them. And I thank you for the chance to be involved in some small way in their lives. Please lead them in the way that they should go. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Any staff need to announce or say anything or do anything?